I have told this story exactly twice in 30 years. Once at her funeral, when the room needed it and I was the only one left who had seen it whole. And once now, to you, because you asked me what the word respect actually weighs, and I find I cannot answer that question with anything except her. So sit, this will take a while and it should. In the spring I am telling you about I was a rifleman and a poor excuse for one. I was 22 and I knew everything, which is the most dangerous age a man can be. I had been a fair shot and a worse soldier, and a string of small stupidities, a fist fight in a Chow hall, a sergeant's jaw, a week in the brig, had landed me where the army puts men it has not yet decided to throw away. They sent me to an outpost at the far edge of nowhere, and they put me on kitchen detail, which to a man of 22 who knew everything was the same as being buried alive. The outpost had a name on the maps and a different name among the men, and I will give you neither, because the place is gone now, and the names belong to people I am still careful with. Call it the firebase. It sat on a shelf of brown rock above a wide brown valley, ringed with wire and sandbag, and the kind of dust that gets into your back teeth and stays there. There was a wall, a long sandbagged firing wall facing north and west, where the ground fell away into open country, and there were tents, and there was a mess. The mess was a single long tent with a plywood floor and a serving line and 2 field ranges, and an urn of coffee that was never, in all my time there, allowed to go cold. The coffee was hers, so was the mess. Her name was Ruth Calloway, and on the day I arrived she was the most invisible person on the firebase. I want to be honest with you about that because the whole of what I am telling you turns on it. I did not see her. Not because she hid, she didn't. She was right there, 3 meals a day, behind the line with a ladle and a flat, clean voice. But because I had already decided what she was, and a man who has decided what a thing is stops looking at it. She was the cook. She was 50, maybe more, lean, gray coming in at her temples, a face weathered the way the sandbags were weathered, by sun and wind and being left out in it. She moved without hurry. She kept the line moving. She had a way of looking at you over the steam tray that I would learn to read later and could not read then. The men called her the Chow line. Not Calloway, not Sergeant, not ma'am, the Chow line. Go see the Chow line about the coffee. The Chow line's out of the good crackers again. It was not cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was the casual, total dismissal of a man stepping around a piece of furniture he has stepped around 1,000 times. She was a function. She produced food and she produced coffee and beyond that she did not, in the imagination of that firebase, exist. I fell into it the way you fall into a current, without deciding. By my second day I was saying the Chow line too. There was a sergeant who set the tone. Doyle. Young for his stripes, which made him loud about them, the way young sergeants are. He ran a rifle squad and he ran it well enough, I'll give him that, but he had the disease of a certain kind of soldier, which is the belief that the only real work in the army is his work, and everything else, the cooks, the clerks, the mechanics, the men who keep the generators running and the water clean, is a kind of theater that exists so that the warriors can be warriors. Doyle loved the wall. He loved standing on it with his rifle and his sunglasses, scanning the valley, narrating the threat to whoever was near. And he had a particular thing he did, a thing I saw 12 times before I understood it was a thing. When the wire went hot, when a sentry called movement, or a round cracked in from the ridgelines, or the radio started chattering and men started running for their positions, there was always a half-second of chaos in the mess if a meal was on. Trays going down, men grabbing weapons, the tent emptying. And in that half-second Doyle, if he was there, would point at Calloway with 2 fingers, the way you'd point a dog back to its corner and say it. Stay in your kitchen, keep the coffee hot. The first time I heard it I laughed. I want you to know that. I laughed because at 22 it was funny, the warriors run to the wall and the cook stays with the coffee, the natural order, huh? She didn't laugh. She didn't argue. She set down whatever was in her hands and she stood by the urn and she watched the men go, and there was something in how she watched them that I was too young and too stupid to name. I named it eventually. It was the look of a person watching amateurs do badly, a thing she had once done better than almost anyone alive. But that was later. Let me tell you about the small things, because the small things are where it was all written, if any of us had been able to read. There was a rifle at the firebase. Not a line rifle, a long gun, a designated marksman's weapon scoped that belonged to a corporal named Settle. Settle was the outpost shooter our reach, the man who could touch the far ridges when the rest of us could only spray and pray. He was good. I want that on the record too, because of how this ends. Settle was genuinely good, a patient kid with steady hands, and he is part of why I tell it. He kept his rifle the way you'd keep a watch, and when he was on the wall he was a different man than off it, quiet and total. But Settle had a hunting rifle too, an old bolt-action thing he'd brought from home in pieces and reassembled, a personal gun the regs probably should not have allowed, and that everyone allowed anyway, the way the regs got bent at the edge of the world. He shot at cans on the back slope on slow afternoons. And one of those afternoons, early in my time there, I watched something I filed away and did not understand. Settle was shooting and missing. There was a wind. That valley had a wind that came up the slope in the afternoons, treacherous, full of false bottoms, and he was reading it wrong, walking his shots, frustrated. And Calloway came out to dump the gray water from the kitchen, a 5-gallon can on each hip, and she stopped. She stood there in her stained apron with the cans in her hands, and she watched him miss. And then she said, not loud, not to anyone in particular, the way you'd comment on weather. He's holding for the wind at his face. It's quartering. It'll be twice that down by the cans. And she walked on. Settle didn't hear her. I half heard her and didn't process it. But I remember it now the way you remember a single frame from a film you've watched too many times, her standing in the dust, water cans in hand, calling a wind across 400 yards by the way it moved the brush. I remember thinking vaguely, and then thinking nothing, because she was the Chow line and the Chow line did not call wind. There were other things. She maintained that old hunting rifle of Settle's and his issue weapon too. I came on her once in the mess after hours with the bolt out and a cleaning rod working and a rag and a little tin of something, her hands moving without her eyes on them, fast and certain, the way a man's hands move on a thing he has done 10,000 times. When she saw me, she put it down, unhurried, and asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. I did not ask why the cook was cleaning the shooter's rifle, because at 22 I had decided what she was. And what she was did not include knowing one end of a rifle from the other. She had a notebook, a small green one, the kind they issue, and she kept it in her apron, and sometimes between meals she sat on the back step of the mess and wrote in it, looking out at the valley. I assumed recipes. I assumed letters. I assumed the way you assume about furniture, nothing at all. And she had the look. I have to tell you about the look one more time because it is the hinge. There were nights when the firebase took fire, sporadic, mostly, harassing rounds from the ridges that did little but keep us tired, and the men would scramble to the wall and shoot back into the dark, and the noise of it was enormous, and afterward there'd be that wired silence and the smell of cordite and everyone too jacked up to sleep. And Calloway would be in the mess making coffee, because that was her job. That was where Doyle's 2 fingers had pointed her. And as the men came down off the wall loud with adrenaline, she'd pour, and she'd watch them, and her face would have that look. I called it in my head patience. Later I understood it was grief. She was watching boys play at a thing she had paid the full price for, and she was waiting, though I don't think even she knew she was waiting, for the day the playing would stop and the price would come due, and she would have to decide whether to pay it again. That day came in the heat of June. I have gone over the morning of it more times than I can count, and the strange thing is how ordinary it was, right up until it wasn't. A relief patrol was coming in. Resupply mail, a swap of 2 men whose tour were up, all of it carried by a mounted element coming up the valley from the main road. Routine. They did it every couple of weeks. The road came up the valley floor, and then there was a stretch where the vehicles couldn't go, a wash too soft. a culvert blown out months back and never fixed, and the patrol had to dismount and come the last leg on foot, up through a long open draw that climbed to within a few hundred meters of our wire. We could see the whole draw from the wall. We watched them every time. It was, the men joked, the best show in the valley. 11, 12 guys humping uphill in full kit in the heat, cursing, while we sat on the wall and drank Callaway's coffee and offered helpful commentary. Settle was on the wall that morning with his scoped rifle, doing his job, overwatch on the draw, covering the patrol's climb. Doyle was up there too, and a half-dozen others and me, because my KP shift was done and there was nothing to do but watch the show. Callaway was in the mess. I could see her through the open tent flap, working, because a relief patrol meant fresh anything and she was making the most of it. The patrol came into the draw at about 10 in the morning. 11 men, strung out in a loose file, climbing. Among them, walking near the middle, was the patrol's own marksman, a sergeant named Akaffer that I'd meet properly only at the end of that day, carrying a scoped rifle like Settle's. I bring him up now because the universe has a cruelty to its arithmetic. That draw, that morning, held the two best shooters within 50 miles, and within 10 minutes both of them would be out of the fight. It started with a single shot. I have heard a lot of fire in my life, and I can tell you that the worst sound in the world is not a lot of it. The worst sound is one round, perfectly placed, into a man who did not know it was coming. Because one round placed means a shooter, means patience on the other side, means somebody up in the rocks above the draw had been lying still in the heat for hours, waiting for exactly this, and had just shown you that the next 2 hours belonged to him. The round took the patrol's point man and put him down and did not let him up, and then the draw came alive. They'd said it perfectly. I understood the geometry later, with maps, the way you understand a car crash from the skid marks. The enemy had the high rocks on both sides of the draw and the head of it, 3 positions in an arc, and they had let the patrol climb all the way up into the open middle where there was no cover worth the name. A few rocks the size of footlockers, a fold in the ground a foot deep, before they opened up. It was a killing ground and the patrol was standing in the center of it, and there was nowhere to go but down, into the dirt and pray. The men went down into the dirt. They returned fire wild at first, the way you do, then steadier as the sergeants got hold of them, but they were shooting uphill at men in rock who they could not see, and the geometry was all wrong and they were pinned. Truly pinned. The kind of pinned where every time a man tried to move, to drag a wounded buddy to get to better cover, the fire found him and put him back down. On the wall it was chaos for about 4 seconds and then it was something worse, which was clarity, because we could see all of it and we could do almost nothing about it. The range. That's the thing you have to understand that I did not understand until that morning taught me. The enemy positions in the high rocks were far, not far for the kind of fight movies sell you, where everyone's shooting across a parking lot, far in the real way. The nearest of the 3 positions was better than 1,000 meters from our wall. The far one, the one at the head of the draw doing the most killing, the patient one, was, we'd learn, better than 1900. Our line rifles, my rifle, were noise at that range and nothing else. We could shoot all day and never touch them. We were close enough to watch men die and too far to stop it, which is a specific kind of hell that I would not wish on the worst man I ever served with. Settle could reach them. Settle and his scoped rifle were the one thing on that firebase that could touch the high rocks. And Settle got up on the wall, calm, total, the good kid, and he found his rest and he put the scope up and he started to work the problem. And the patient shooter at the head of the draw, the one at 1900 meters, the one who had set this whole thing and knew exactly where our overwatch would be, shot Settle off the wall. I was 8 feet from him. I saw it. He went back and down and the rifle clattered on the plywood and there was a sound from Doyle that I had never heard a sergeant make. Settle was alive, he'd live. He lost the use of a hand and the better part of a year, but he'd live and we dragged him back and the medic got on him. But the rifle, the scoped rifle, our one reach, was lying on the wall in the open with rounds cracking over it. and there was not a man among us with the skill to use it even if we could get to it. And down in the draw, men were dying. I could hear it now. You can hear the difference when fire goes from suppressing to killing. The patient shooter had shifted back to the draw and he was doing arithmetic down there, one round at a time, and Akafor, their marksman, was already down, hit early. I don't know if he ever even got his rifle up. The patrol's fire was thinning. That is the most terrible thing of all to hear, fire thinning, because it does not mean the fight is calming. It means the shooters are running out of men. Doyle was screaming into the radio for air, for artillery, for anything, and the answer coming back was the answer that comes back at the edge of the world. Nothing available, nothing close. Hold what you've got, we're working it. 20 minutes, 30, an hour, time that the men in the draw did not have. I remember Doyle's face going from rage to something underneath rage, which was the understanding that he was going to stand on this wall and watch 11 men get shot to pieces in the open, and there was not one thing his stripes or his rifle or his loud, certain voice could do about it. And that is when I felt her come up beside me. She had crossed from the mess to the wall and I had not seen her do it. She was just there at my shoulder in her apron, and she was looking down into the draw the way she looked at everything, flat and clean and total, and she said one word. She said, range. I didn't answer her. I didn't even understand the question was for me, or that it was a real question, or that the Chow line had any business asking it. I think I said something. I think I said, get back, get down, you can't be up here. The reflex of it. The two fingers pointing her back to her corner, except they were mine now. She didn't look at me. She looked at Settle's rifle, lying on the wall in the open with rounds still snapping past it, and she looked at the high rocks, and she looked at the men in the draw, and then she did the thing I will see when I close my eyes on the last day of my life. She went over the wall. Not over the top, along it, low and fast on her hands and the toes of her boots, across the open stretch where Settle had been hit, into the fire, and she got her hand on that rifle, and she dragged it back to the sandbags, and she did not stop moving, did not flinch, did not freeze, while the patient shooter at 1900 meters put a round into the bag a foot from her head and blew dust across her face. She came back into cover with the rifle, and she wiped the dust out of her eyes with the back of one wrist, once, and she settled the rifle onto the bags, and she put her cheek to the stock. And the firebase changed. I have spent 30 years trying to describe what changed, and the closest I can get is this. A tool that has been in the wrong hands the whole time is suddenly in the right ones, and you can feel it the way you can feel a key go into a lock it was actually cut for. There was nothing dramatic about it. That's the thing. She didn't shout. She didn't move fast anymore. The running was over, and now she was still, stiller than I have ever seen a human being, and the stillness was the most frightening and the most beautiful thing on that wall. Her hands knew the rifle. Her body folded down behind it into a shape that had taken someone 10,000 hours to build, and she started to talk, low to herself, or maybe to the rifle, or maybe to the dead corporal whose gun it was. Cold bore, she said. First one's cold, hold for it. Doyle came down the wall at her. I want to tell you he came to help and I can't because he didn't. He came to send her back, even then. Even with men dying in the open and his own rifle useless, and the one person on the firebase who knew what to do with the long gun lying behind it, even then, the reflex in him was so deep that he grabbed her shoulder and started the sentence. Get off the wall, get back to your. She didn't take her cheek off the stock. She didn't raise her voice. She said 4 words flat and they stopped him like a wall. Spot for me, Sergeant. And there was something in how she said sergeant, not afraid of his rank, not contemptuous of it, just past it. The way a master speaks to an apprentice who is in the way. And Doyle, for the first time since I'd known him, did what he was told. He got down behind the spotting scope that lay there, the scope none of us had thought to use because it was Settle's and Settle was down, and he put his eye to it, and his hand was shaking, and he said, in a voice I'd never heard from him, What do you need? The far one, she said. Head of the draw, he's the patient one. He shot your overwatch, he's the one killing them. Find him. I can't, there's nothing I can't see. He's left of the notch rock in the shadow line low, he's good, he won't move much. Look for the shadow that's the wrong shape. A pause, her breathing slowing. Take your time, he's not going anywhere, he thinks he's won. I have him, I think I have him. Range him. And Doyle, hands shaking, read the range off the scope, and his voice when he said the number cracked in the middle of it, because the number was a number none of us had any business trying to shoot. She didn't react to it. She took it the way you take a fact. She made an adjustment to the scope on top of Settle's rifle, 2 small movements of her fingers precise as a watchmaker, and she said the wind to herself, quartering, right to left, full value low, half up top, it'll lift her. And I understood distantly that her was the bullet, that she was already in flight with it before it left the barrel. And she breathed out slow, and the slow breath emptied her. And on the bottom of it, in the stillness, with the rifle and the wind and the dead corporal's gun all gone quiet in her hands, she pressed the trigger. I did not see the round hit. You don't at that range, not with the naked eye. I saw Doyle's whole body jerk behind the spotting scope, and I heard him make a sound, a high broken sound, and I heard him say a word that I will carry to my grave. He said down. The patient shooter at 1900 meters, the one who had killed the point man and shot Settle off the wall and was doing 1-round arithmetic on the pin patrol. The one none of us could touch was down off her first shot, her cold-bore shot, the hardest shot there is, the one you only get one of. And in the draw, almost at once, the fire from the head of it stopped and you could feel the men down there feel it, feel the worst of the killing lift off them. She was already moving the rifle. She did not celebrate it, she did not look up. She worked the bolt, that clean, fast, certain motion of her hands I'd seen in the mess and not understood, and she said, next, the right side position. He'll be confused now. He'll lift his head to see what happened to the boss. Find him for me. What followed took, by the watch, a little under 4 minutes. I know because Doyle, in the after-action that he gave through a throat that would not work right, said under 4 minutes, and I have never doubted it, because it felt like both 4 seconds and 4 hours, the way the truest things do. She broke the ambush. Methodically, one position at a time, the way you'd take apart an engine. The right side position lifted ahead to see what had happened to the patient shooter, and she put it down. The left side position, realizing the geometry had inverted, that the killing ground had become their killing ground, that there was something on the firebase wall now that could reach into their rocks and pull them out one at a time, tried to move, tried to displace to better cover, and she caught one in the open between rocks and the others stopped moving, which was the same as stopping fighting, because a shooter who cannot move cannot work. 6. The number was 6 in the end, 6 positions, 6 men that she neutralized or pinned so hard they were out of the fight, in under 4 minutes, with a borrowed rifle she had crossed open fire to retrieve, at ranges that ran from 1,000 meters to better than 1900. I am not going to dress it up for you. I am not going to tell you every shot was a kill, because I don't know, and because it doesn't matter, and because she would have hated the telling of it as a tally. What I will tell you is that when she was done, the draw was silent except for our own people, and the fire that had been killing 11 men in the open had been taken apart by one woman in a stained apron, and not one of those 11 men died in the time after she put her cheek to the stock. The point man was already gone, so was one other early before she ever reached the rifle, 2. And she carried those 2 for the rest of her life, I know, because I knew her after, and she never once spoke of the 6, but she spoke of the 2. That is who she was. The men she saved were arithmetic she would not do. The men she lost were a debt she paid interest on until she died. When the last position stopped moving, she did not get up. She stayed on the rifle, watching the high rocks through the scope, breathing slow, while down in the draw the survivors understood, one by one, that the sky had stopped falling on them and got their wounded up, and began to move, finally able to move back up the draw toward our wire. She covered them the whole way. She lay on that wall in the heat with her eye to the glass, and she covered 11 men, -2, all the way home, and she did not lower the rifle until the last of them was inside the wire and the gate was shut behind them. And then she did lower it. She worked the bolt one last time and laid the rifle down on the sandbags, gentle, the way you'd lay down something that belonged to someone you respected. And she sat up, and she wiped the dust off her face again with the back of her wrist, the same plain motion as before, and she looked tired. That's all. Tired, the way you look after a long shift. She did not look like a person who had just done the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen a human being do. She looked like the Chow line at the end of a hard day. The wall was dead silent. All of us, Doyle, me, the others, frozen, staring at her, and not one of us had a word. She broke it herself. She looked at the urn glinting through the open mess tent, and she said in that flat, clean voice to no one and to all of us, "Coffee's probably gone cold." And she got up to go make more. She didn't make it to the mess, because that was when the gate opened and the patrol came in. The patrol came in the way men come in off a thing like that, gray-faced, shaking, carrying their wounded and their 2 dead, looking at the dirt, looking at nothing, the 1,000-yard stare already setting into the young ones. And among them, helped along by 2 others, a wound packed high on his shoulder and his scoped rifle still slung across his back because he'd refused to let go of it, was the patrol's marksman, Sergeant Akaffer, the one who'd been hit early. The one who'd lain in the draw and watched it all upside down, helpless, the way I'd watched it from the wall. But Akaffer was older than the rest. Career. The kind of senior NCO who has been everywhere and seen everyone. The kind of man for whom the army is not a job but a long memory. And as they brought him through the gate, he was already looking up at the wall, because down in the draw, with the fire breaking apart around him, one impossible shot at a time, a man who knew shooting the way Akaffer knew shooting would have understood, faster than any of us safe up on the wall, exactly what he was hearing. He'd have heard the cadence of it, the patience, the cold bore first round at a range that should not have been possible. He'd have lain there bleeding in the dirt and heard somebody up on that wall doing a thing that, in all his long memory, he had only ever heard one person do. He came through the gate and he stopped. He shrugged off the 2 men holding him up, and he stood on his own, swaying, and he looked up at the wall where Ruth Calloway stood in her apron with the dust on her face, and his own face, this hard old senior sergeant's face, came apart. He said a word, quiet, but the wall had gone so silent that we all heard it. He said, "Longshadow." I didn't know what it meant. Most of us didn't. But Doyle did. I saw it land on him, and Akaffer said it again, louder. And now there was water standing in the old man's eyes, and he said it like a prayer and an accusation, and a homecoming all at once. "Longshadow, they said you were dead. They said," and his voice went, and he stopped, and he just looked at her. And she looked back at him for a long moment, and something passed between them that belonged to a world none of the rest of us had been to. And then she did a small thing that finished the unmaking of me. She came down off the wall, slow, and she crossed to the old sergeant, and she put her hand flat on his good shoulder, light, and she said, not to the firebase, just to him, but we all heard it. "Not dead, Top, just cooking." Akaffer laughed. It was a terrible laugh, half a sob, the laugh of a man who has just learned that a ghost he had grieved has been pouring his coffee, and he came to attention. Wounded, swaying, packed with a field dressing, he straightened his spine and he brought his good hand up and he held a salute to a woman in a stained apron. And he held it, and he held it, the way you hold a salute you have waited a long time to be allowed to give. And here is the part I tell you slowly, because it is the part you asked me about. It is the part about respect and what it weighs. Doyle moved. The young sergeant, the one with the 2 fingers, the one who had pointed her back to her corner a dozen times, the one who had grabbed her shoulder on the wall not 20 minutes before to send her back to the coffee. Doyle came up out of wherever he'd been standing and he walked stiff, like a man walking to his own sentencing, and he stopped in front of her and his face was wrecked. And he came to attention. He came to attention and he saluted her, and his arm was shaking, and he could not get a single word out, and he didn't need to, because the salute said the only thing there was to say, which was I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I was wrong in a way I will spend the rest of my life understanding. And then the wall came to attention. The whole line. Every man who could stand stood and saluted the Chow line, and the ones who couldn't stand watched the ones who could, and nobody made a sound. I came to attention. I was 22 and I knew everything, and I had been calling her the Chow line 3 days ago, and I came to attention, and I held a salute to her with the rest of them, and I was not ashamed of the water on my own face, because there was not a man on that wall whose face was dry. She let them hold it for a moment. And then, and this is so completely her that I almost can't tell it, she looked faintly embarrassed by all of it, the way you'd be embarrassed if a room stood up for you over something you considered just the job, and she gave a small nod, the smallest acknowledgement enough to release us. And then she said, gently, because there were wounded men who needed care and a firebase that needed running, and she was, still in the deepest part of herself, the person who took care of the rest of us. All right, that's enough of that. Somebody get Sergeant Akaffer to the aid station and the rest of you off the wall before you give them another target. A beat, the ghost of something dry. And I meant it about the coffee. It's cold. Give me 10 minutes. And she went and made coffee. I learned the rest of it slowly, over the weeks after, in pieces, the way you learn anything true. Akaffer told me most of it before he rotated out. Longshadow had been her call sign. Years back, a different war, she had been a shooter, not a shooter, the one they brought up when the range was impossible and the situation was hopeless, the one whose record stood at the longest confirmed shot in the theater for a span of years that I will not specify because the specifics still belong to people who'd rather they stayed quiet. She had been a legend in the small, terrible world of men who do that work, the way Akaffer had once been young in that world and had heard her name spoken the way you'd speak a saint's. And then she had gone away. There'd been a thing, there is always a thing, a shot she was ordered to take that she would not take or took and could not live with. I never learned which and never asked, because some doors you do not open in another person. And she had walked away from all of it, turned in the rifle, taken the green notebook and the steady hands and the wind she could read across 400 yards, and gone to the farthest, quietest corner of the army she could find, and learned to cook, and poured coffee, and let the world call her the Chow line, because the Chow line did not have to take shots she could not live with. She had chosen the kitchen. That was the thing I understood last, and that changed me most. We had all thought she was in the kitchen because the kitchen was all she was good for. She was in the kitchen because she had been good for the most terrible thing there is, and had decided not to be, and the only way to hold that decision was to disappear into the urn and the steam tray and let a boy like Doyle point 2 fingers at her and feel like the warrior. Her composure on the wall, the stillness, the slow breath, the way she never raised her voice, never gloated, never once, not even at the end, made any of us pay for what we'd called her. That wasn't the absence of feeling. It was the most disciplined thing I have ever witnessed. It was a woman who knew exactly what she was capable of, and exactly what it cost, picking the weight back up for the length of one fight because 11 men were dying, and she was the only one who could reach them, and then setting it back down on purpose, and going to make coffee before any of us could turn her into a hero and take the choosing away from her. I never called her the Chow line again. None of us did. But here is the strange grace of it. She did not want to be called Longshadow either. When the men, in their first flush of awe, started saying it, started treating her like the legend Akaffer had named, she shut it down, gently and completely. That's not my name, she said. My name's Calloway and my job's the mess and the coffee's on. She made us put her back in the kitchen. And we did, but it was a different kitchen now, because the men who walked through her line walked through it the way you'd walk past an altar you'd been too blind to see. And the coffee she poured was the coffee of someone we would, every one of us, have died for gladly, and she knew it. And she poured it anyway, flat and clean and certain, like nothing at all had happened. I served out my time and got my act together. She had something to do with that, though we never had the conversation, you don't, with her, and I went home and made a life. I went back once, years later, to a reunion of sorts, and she was still in. Older, still in a mess somewhere by choice, still pouring. We talked for an hour and she asked about my kids and never once mentioned the wall. And when I tried to thank her, finally, for the 11 men and for the lesson, and for what she'd made of a stupid 22-year-old who knew everything, she waved it off and topped up my cup and said, "You'd have done the same if you could have." Which wasn't true, but it was the kindest lie I was ever told, and it was so completely her that I let it stand. She is gone now. I told this at her funeral, the part the room could bear, and there were old men there, hard old men, some of them famous in that small, terrible world, who came to attention by her box the way Akaffer had come to attention by the gate, and held it and held it. You asked me what respect weighs. Here is the whole of my answer, and then I'll let you go. Respect is not the salute. The salute is just the thing the body does when the soul finally sees. Respect is what comes before. It is the willingness to look, to keep looking at the person in front of you instead of the idea you've already decided they are. We did not respect Ruth Calloway for 30 seconds on a wall in June. We respected her in the instant we were forced at last to see her, and the unbearable thing, the thing I have carried for 30 years, is that she had been entirely visible the whole time. Standing right there, pouring the coffee, calling the wind. We just hadn't looked because we decided what she was, and a man who has decided what a thing is stops looking at it. So I'll leave you with what she left me, which I have tried to live by and mostly failed and kept trying anyway. Look at the quiet ones. Look at the ones you've decided are furniture. Look at the Chow line. You have no idea, none, what is folded up inside the people you have stopped seeing, what they have set down on purpose, what they would pick back up if your life depended on it. She kept the coffee hot. She also kept 11 men alive at a range no one else could reach, and then went back and kept the coffee hot. And never once asked which one we'd remember her by. I remember her by both. That's the respect. It weighs everything.